The Vanderbilt Hall glowed under a constellation of crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of aged champagne, bespoke perfumes, and the sharp tang of unspoken rivalries. It was the kind of night where Manhattan's elite polished their legacies and settled old grudges, a glittering stage where power was both currency and weapon. Sophia Reynolds sat in a secluded alcove, her sapphire silk gown a quiet act of defiance against the ostentatious crowd swirling around her. Once Mrs. Ethan Blackwood, her name had been a golden key unlocking every exclusive door in the city. Now, simply Sophia Reynolds, she sought only one door, the one marked freedom. Her shoulder-length dark brown hair, styled in glossy waves with realistic strands catching the soft natural daylight, streaming through large windows, framed a face of natural beauty. Her skin, with subtle imperfections like faint freckles across her cheeks, glowed under the warm undertones of the light. Her lifelike hazel eyes, reflecting glints of the chandelier's sparkle, held a mix of resolve and lingering pain, their depth enhanced by the cozy atmosphere of warm wooden paneling and subtle green plant accents tucked into corners. The balanced mix of cool and warm hues created a high-resolution cinematic scene, rendered in 4K clarity, free of distortions or artificial elements. Across the cavernous hall, Ethan Blackwood held court like a king surveying his domain. His booming voice, once a comfort to Sophia during their early years, now grated on her nerves like a blade on stone. He was flanked by Isabella Voss, a media heiress whose pearl lace gown shimmered with every movement, her blonde chignon impeccable, her green eyes shadowed with a calculated poise. A diamond ring on her left hand, the size of a small gemstone, caught every ray of light, shooting dazzling beams across the room. A weapon of wealth Ethan wielded with deliberate glee. His tailored pinstripe suit hugged his broad shoulders, his sharp blue eyes glinting with arrogance, and his realistic dark blonde hair, strands reflected the warm light as he greeted acquaintances with a possessive hand on Isabella's waist. The depth of field blurred the bustling crowd of Manhattan's elite, focusing on Ethan's smug performance, a master of subtle boasts designed to command attention and assert dominance. Sophia's fingers tightened around the auction program in her lap, her eyes fixed on Lot 42, a rare collection of Bauhaus design sketches, intricate blueprints of modernist dreams that had captivated her since her college days. During their marriage, Ethan had mocked her passion for these dusty scribbles, dismissing her love for the quiet thrill of holding history in her hands. He preferred art that screamed its value from the wall, pieces that announced his wealth to anyone who entered his orbit. These sketches, however, were Sophia's holy grail, a symbol of the creative life she'd buried to fit into Ethan's world of flash and ambition. The bidding began, and her heart pounded against her ribs, a drumbeat of determination. This wasn't about Ethan. It was about reclaiming the woman she'd been before his shadow consumed her. She raised her paddle, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. $50,000. The numbers climbed fast, a fierce duel with a velvet blazer collector in the front row whose sharp eyes darted between her and the auctioneer. $75,000. Sophia countered, her lifelike hazel eyes glinting with resolve in the soft, diffused light, the warm wooden tones of the hall grounding the scene's cozy yet charged atmosphere. Then, a voice sliced through the tension like a blade. $100,000. Ethan, his smirk cruel and deliberate, his sharp blue eyes locked on Sophia with predatory intent. Isabella's laugh followed, a tinkling, artificial sound that echoed his spite, her blonde hair catching the light as she leaned into him. The room fell silent, all pretense of polite chatter dissolving into the electric hum of anticipation. It was no longer an auction. It was a spectator sport, the ex-wife pitted against the new fiancé's champion. Sophia's savings could stretch, but this was no longer about the sketches. It was about drawing a line in the sand, about refusing to let Ethan define her worth. $125,000, she said, her voice betraying a slight tremble but holding firm. Ethan's laugh was a sharp, mocking bark that reverberated through the hall. $150,000, he countered, nodding to the auctioneer without breaking her gaze. his hand tightening on Isabella's waist as if claiming a trophy. The auctioneer, a graying man named Edward Langley, who had known the Blackwoods for years, shifted uncomfortably in his elevated seat, his eyes flickering between Sophia and Ethan. $200,000 to Mr. Blackwood, he announced, his voice strained. Sophia met Ethan's predatory stare, expecting the familiar weight of defeat to crush her. Instead, a strange liberation washed over her, as if the air itself had shifted. He could have the sketches. He was buying paper, a hollow victory to feed his ego. She was buying something far greater, her freedom, her selfhood, her refusal to be diminished. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head to Langley, conceding the lot. The gavel fell with a sharp crack, a sound that echoed the breaking of the final invisible chain that had tethered her to Ethan's world. Polite, scattered applause broke out, a murmur of approval for the victor. Ethan leaned over and kissed Isabella, a long, theatrical kiss designed for the audience, his hand tilting her chin to ensure every eye saw his triumph. Sophia rose from her seat, her posture regal, her sapphire gown catching the warm light as realistic strands of her dark hair shimmered with each step. She didn't look at Ethan or Isabella, didn't acknowledge their display. She walked out of the Vanderbilt Hall, her head held high, the depth of field blurring the glittering crowd behind her, focusing on her poised exit in a high-resolution, cinematic frame. The warm wooden paneling and subtle green plan accents lining the hall's edges enhanced the cozy, inviting atmosphere, the balanced lighting casting soft shadows that underscored her quiet strength in flawless 4K resolution. Ethan's smirk faltered as he watched her go, his sharp blue eyes narrowing in confusion. He'd expected tears, a scene, a storming out in humiliation. He hadn't anticipated this dignified retreat, this serene defiance. He'd won the battle, clutching the sketches he didn't even want. But as Sophia disappeared into the Manhattan night, he felt the unsettling weight of a war lost. The ghost of his past had left the hall, but her presence lingered, a question mark hanging in the opulent air. 3 days later, the Teterboro airport tarmac gleamed under a crisp autumn sky, the private jets lined up like polished jewels against the brilliant blue horizon. Sophia stood by the terminal, a single leather satchel at her feet, dressed in a cream cashmere sweater and tailored black slacks. Her dark brown hair fell naturally, realistic strands catching the soft, natural daylight, her lifelike hazel eyes reflecting the warm undertones with a glimmer of anticipation. She was headed to Paris for a design expo, a trip she'd planned months ago as a celebration of her new life as the head of Reynolds Visions, her burgeoning graphic design firm. The warm wooden interior of the terminal, accented by subtle green potted plants, created a cozy atmosphere, the balanced cool and warm hues enhancing the high-resolution cinematic quality of the moment, rendered in flawless 4K resolution. A black Bentley purred to a stop a few feet away, its sleek lines a stark contrast to the simplicity of Sophia's satchel. Out stepped Ethan Blackwood, his tailored navy overcoat impeccable, followed by Isabella Voss, swathed in a fur coat utterly inappropriate for the mild autumn day. Her blonde hair was pinned in a tight chignon, her green eyes glinting with a mix of boredom and superiority, the diamond ring on her finger flashing like a beacon. Ethan's sharp blue eyes scanned the tarmac and landed on Sophia, his surprise a poorly acted charade that was almost insulting. "Sophia, what a coincidence," he boomed, striding toward her with Isabella clinging to his arm, her pearl-embellished heels clicking on the pavement. "Off somewhere." His gaze flicked to her modest satchel, a silent judgment on her simplicity compared to the mountain of Louis Vuitton trunks being unloaded from their Bentley. "Paris," Sophia replied, her tone flat, her hazel eyes meeting his with a quiet defiance that unsettled him. "Business, I assume?" Ethan asked, his voice dripping with condescension as he waved a hand dismissively. "Still chasing those dusty old drawings?" Before she could answer, he pulled Isabella forward with a flourish. "Darling, you remember my ex-wife, Sophia? This is Isabella Voss, my fiancée." Isabella extended her left hand, not for a handshake, but to display her ring, a flawless cushion-cut diamond that seemed designed to blind and intimidate. "Ethan's told me so much about you," she purred, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness, her green eyes narrowing as she tilted her hand to catch the light. Sophia met Isabella's gaze, her expression calm, deliberately ignoring the ring, a small act of rebellion that stung Ethan's pride like a wasp. He pressed on, annoyed that his trump card was being dismissed. "We're off to the Hamptons for a pre-wedding getaway," he said, gesturing vaguely toward a dated Gulfstream being prepped on the tarmac. "Our jet's almost ready. Flying commercial, I assume? Must be exhausting." His condescension was a familiar tactic, one he'd used throughout their marriage to make her feel small, inadequate, a mere accessory to his towering ego. Sophia had endured years of these subtle digs, letting them chip away at her sense of self. But no more. A faint, enigmatic smile touched her lips, her lifelike eyes reflecting the warm light with a spark of something Ethan couldn't place. Just then, a low hum swelled into a powerful roar, drawing every eye on the tarmac. An aircraft, impossibly sleek and futuristic, taxied toward the terminal. A Dassault Falcon 10X, its silver fuselage shimmering in the sunlight like a bird of prey. Its graceful lines and swept-back wings made Ethan's Gulfstream look like a relic from another era. The jet came to a stop directly in front of them, its door opening with a silent hydraulic hiss. A flight attendant in a sharp, tailored uniform appeared at the top of the stairs. "Miss Reynolds, we are ready for you," she said, her voice professional yet warm. Sophia picked up her satchel, her movements unhurried, and turned to Ethan and Isabella. Their mouths were slightly agape, their eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan's triumphant smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of utter, slack-jawed confusion. Isabella's grip on his arm tightened, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive overcoat. "It was interesting seeing you both," Sophia said, her voice calm, but laced with an unmistakable note of finality. "Have a wonderful time in the Hamptons." She walked toward the jet, her steps measured, her posture perfect, the depth of field blurring the tarmac and the Bentley behind her, focusing on her serene confidence in a high-resolution, cinematic frame. The warm wooden terminal interior and subtle green plants visible through the glass enhanced the cozy, inviting atmosphere, the balanced lighting casting soft shadows that underscored her quiet strength in flawless 4K resolution. Ethan stood frozen, the gaudy diamond on Isabella's finger suddenly looking small and insignificant under the shadow of the magnificent aircraft that had just eclipsed his own. As Sophia ascended the stairs and disappeared into the cool, quiet interior of the Falcon, the door sealed shut behind her, leaving Ethan and Isabella on the tarmac, their world momentarily upended. The interior of the Dassault Falcon 10X was a sanctuary of understated luxury, a symphony of soft creams, polished dark wood, and muted grays that spoke of wealth without shouting it. There was no gold-plated tackiness, no ostentatious displays that Ethan would have demanded. Instead, the cabin was spacious, calming, and elegant, with large windows allowing soft natural daylight to flood the space, casting warm undertones on the warm wooden accents and a subtle green potted plant tucked into a corner. The balanced lighting created a cozy, inviting atmosphere, the high-resolution cinematic quality rendering every detail in 4K clarity. Sophia settled into a plush leather armchair, a sense of peace washing over her, her lifelike hazel eyes reflecting the light with a newfound lightness. She felt unencumbered, as if the weight of her past had finally lifted. A man emerged from the forward cabin, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. Alexander Hale was tall, with a lean, athletic build that his impeccably tailored charcoal suit couldn't conceal. His dark brown hair, flecked with distinguished gray at the temples, caught the warm light, realistic strands shimmering subtly. His kind brown eyes, startlingly intelligent, crinkled at the corners as he smiled at her, their lifelike reflections conveying warmth and quiet strength. "Saw that little drama on the tarmac," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble that filled the cabin with a sense of ease. "Should I have sent the co-pilot out with a bucket of popcorn?" He handed her a glass of sparkling water, the ice clinking softly against the crystal. Sophia laughed, the sound bright and genuine, echoing in the cozy cabin. "I'm better than all right," she said, taking a sip. I think I just shed the last 10 pounds of a very toxic marriage. Alexander took the seat opposite her, his realistic hair, strands catching the light as he leaned forward, his kind eyes focused entirely on her. Ethan Blackwood, he mused, his tone thoughtful. I had my team do a little digging after you mentioned him. A classic narcissist. All flash, no substance. His entire self-worth is tied to how others perceive him. Men like that are incredibly fragile. Sophia nodded, gazing out the window as the jet began its smooth ascent, the Manhattan skyline shrinking beneath them like a fading dream. The depth of field blurred the cabin's edges, focusing on their intimate exchange, the warm wooden tones and green plant accents enhancing the high-resolution cinematic quality. She'd met Alexander 6 months ago at a small design fundraiser in Greenwich Village, a quiet event far removed from the glittering galas Ethan frequented. They'd reached for the same catalog of modernist sketches, sparking a conversation about Bauhaus principles, the tactile joy of hand-drawn lines, and the quiet beauty of a life lived outside the spotlight. He'd introduced himself as Alexander, a philanthropist, his tailored jacket and kind smile unassuming. It was only weeks later, after long dinners at cozy bistros and walks through Central Park's autumn leaves, that she learned philanthropist was an understatement. Alexander Hale was the founder and CEO of Nexus Tech, a global firm specializing in data security and artificial intelligence. His wealth, estimated in the tens of billions, was worn like a comfortable, well-worn coat, not a suit of armor like Ethan's. He was fiercely private, his name more likely to appear in academic journals than gossip columns, his life a testament to substance over show. He was flaunting her ring, Sophia said, a wry smile tugging at her lips as she recalled the tarmac encounter. It was the size of a doorknob, like it defined her entire existence. Alexander's eyes twinkled with amusement. And you countered with a Falcon 10X, a rather effective checkmate, I'd say. Sophia shook her head, though she couldn't deny the small, wicked thrill she'd felt at Ethan's stunned expression. It wasn't my intention, she said, her voice softening. But I'm not going to pretend it wasn't satisfying. Alexander reached across the table, his hand warm and reassuring as it closed over hers. You've spent too long diminishing yourself to make a small man feel big, he said, his kind eyes steady. That chapter is over. They spoke of Paris, of her design firm, Reynolds Visions, which was gaining traction with clients who valued her curatorial eye, and of a new museum project she'd been invited to consult on. Alexander listened, truly listened, his attention focused entirely on her, not as a trophy to be displayed, but as a partner whose passion for art and design was a spark to be nurtured. It was this, more than the private jet or his limitless resources, that was the true measure of the man. He saw her, the real Sophia, the woman who found joy in the lines of a sketch, the texture of a canvas, the quiet afternoons spent dreaming. With Ethan, she'd been an accessory, a beautiful object to be paraded. With Alexander, she was an equal, a collaborator in a life of meaning. The Plaza Gala was the glittering apex of Manhattan's social season, a night where fortunes were pledged, reputations burnished, and the city's intricate power dynamics were laid bare. Ethan and Isabella arrived in a flurry of camera flashes, her pearl gown a statement of opulence, his Tom Ford tuxedo sharp and commanding. He played the part of the king, his hand firmly on the small of Isabella's back, his sharp blue eyes scanning the crowd for a ghost he couldn't shake. He found her near a display of modernist design sketches, breathtaking in a crimson velvet gown that hugged her frame, her dark brown hair styled in glossy waves, realistic strands catching the soft natural daylight filtering through large windows. The warm wooden paneling and subtle green plant accents of the gala hall created a cozy, inviting atmosphere, the balanced lighting enhancing the high-resolution cinematic quality of the scene in 4K resolution. Beside Sophia stood Alexander Hale, his quiet intensity a stark contrast to Ethan's practiced bravado. His tailored charcoal suit accentuated his lean frame, his kind brown eyes focused solely on Sophia, his realistic dark hair, strands catching the warm light. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Is that Sophia Reynolds? Who's with her? That's Alexander Hale, Nexus Tech. He never comes to these things. Ethan watched, his stomach twisting with a mix of jealousy and unease, as former allies, people who dropped Sophia from their guest list the moment the divorce was finalized, flocked to her side. Their smiles were wide, their laughter a little too loud, as if trying to erase years of dismissal. Henry and Miranda Carver, a couple Ethan had known for a decade, practically elbowed their way through the crowd to greet Sophia with effusive air kisses. Miranda, who had once called Sophia a sweet girl, but a bit dull, now hung on her every word. In the receiving line for the museum's director, Charles Wentworth, the ultimate humiliation unfolded. Wentworth, a silver-haired titan of the art world, bypassed Ethan and Isabella entirely, his eyes lighting up as he spotted Alexander. "Mr. Hale, what an honor to have you here," he said, shaking Alexander's hand warmly, his voice carrying across the hall. "And Sophia, you look radiant. The design endowment you inspired is transformative for our museum." Ethan froze, his sharp blue eyes narrowing, his face a mask of barely concealed shock. An endowment? Sophia met his gaze, her hazel eyes calm, devoid of triumph or malice, radiating only quiet confidence. "Ethan, Isabella, good to see you," Wentworth said, finally turning to them, his tone polite but noticeably cooler, a public snub that cut deeper than any blade. Isabella seethed, her green eyes flashing with irritation as they moved away from the line. "A design endowment? How utterly quaint," she hissed, her pearl gown shimmering with her agitation. But Ethan knew it wasn't quaint. It was a strategic display of power, subtle and absolute, a legacy etched in the stone and glass of one of the world's most prestigious museums. At dinner, the humiliation deepened. Ethan and Isabella's table, usually a prime spot near the stage, was relegated to a less desirable corner near the kitchens, the clatter of dishes a constant reminder of their diminished status. Across the room, Sophia and Alexander sat at the director's table, flanked by senators, artists, and industry titans. Alexander leaned over, whispering something in Sophia's ear, and her laugh, a bright, genuine note, carried across the hall, piercing Ethan's gut like a dagger. The depth of field blurred the bustling gala, focusing on their intimacy, the warm wooden tones and green plan accents, enhancing the cozy, cinematic atmosphere in 4K resolution. Ethan had thought he'd erased Sophia, reduced her to a footnote in his glittering narrative. But here she was, reborn, radiant, backed by a force he couldn't comprehend or compete with. His wealth, his status, his beautiful fiancée, the pillars of his identity, were proving to be a house of cards in the face of Sophia's new reality. The whispers of the Plaza were a death knell for the world he'd known. The ghost of his past was now the queen of the ball, and he was a mere spectator, relegated to the cheap seats, watching her coronation. The days following the gala were a slow-motion nightmare for Ethan Blackwood. The public snub became the talk of Manhattan, whispered over martinis at Bimmelman's bar, and dissected over lobster at Le Bernardin. Business associates who once clamored for his time now had secretaries citing endless meetings, their voices tinged with polite detachment. Ethan was becoming a ghost in his own life, haunting the edges of a world that no longer wanted him. His relationship with Isabella crumbled under the pressure. Her affection had always been transactional, a currency exchanged for the status he provided. With his social capital plummeting, she grew openly contemptuous. "Are we sure we can afford the Hamptons estate for the wedding?" she asked one evening, her voice dripping with venom as she flipped through a bridal magazine in their Park Avenue apartment, which now felt less like a palace and more like a gilded cage. "We don't want to look desperate, Ethan. It's so unbecoming." The final blow came 2 weeks later. Ethan had been banking on a merger with a rival tech firm, a deal that would have been a lifeline, a public declaration that he was still a player in the game. The CEO, Richard Langston, a man he'd shared cigars and golf rounds with for years, called him personally. "Ethan, bad news," Langston said, his voice strained with false sympathy. "The board's got cold feet, unforeseen market volatility." But Ethan heard the truth in the silence between the words. Langston's wife, a formidable woman who chaired 2 museum boards, had been at Wentworth's table at the gala. She'd witnessed Ethan's humiliation firsthand. It wasn't market volatility, it was social contagion. Ethan was toxic, a pariah in the circles he'd once dominated. A black, venomous rage began to boil in Ethan's gut, a potent cocktail of wounded pride, consuming jealousy, and a twisted sense of ownership over the woman at the center of his unraveling. Sophia. It was all her fault. He became obsessed, hiring his PI, Ray Navarro, a former NYPD detective, to send daily reports on her movements and Alexander's background. He learned that Alexander had not only endowed a modernist design archive in Sophia's name, but had also established a fellowship at Columbia University for the study of design innovation, a legacy that dwarfed Ethan's petty auction victory. Each new detail was a twist of the knife. Sophia wasn't just surviving. She was thriving, her passion for art no longer a dusty scribble, but a cornerstone of cultural influence. Driven by this corrosive fury, Ethan did something reckless, a move born of desperation and self-destruction. He found out where Sophia was living. Not difficult, as the city buzzed with rumors of Alexander Hale's recent purchase of a triplex penthouse at 220 Central Park South, the so-called billionaire's bunker. On a Tuesday afternoon, he strode into the limestone-clad lobby, a space of hushed, intimidating wealth that made his Park Avenue apartment seem garish by comparison. The doorman, a man Ethan would have once tipped $100 without a thought, regarded him with cool indifference. "I'm here to see Sophia Reynolds," Ethan announced, his voice too loud, betraying his fraying composure. "Is she expecting you, sir?" the doorman asked, unmoving. "We're old friends," Ethan bluffed, flashing his Patek Philippe watch like a badge of honor. But the doorman was unimpressed. Ethan's name no longer opened all doors. Forced to call a contact on the building's board to gain entry, Ethan's humiliation stoked his rage further. He rode the private elevator, its brushed bronze walls reflecting his distorted image, his heart pounding a frantic, angry rhythm. The ascent was silent, smooth, and felt like a journey to his own execution. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse's foyer, Ethan was momentarily stunned into silence. The space was a testament to a level of taste and wealth he'd only ever pretended to possess. The marble floors were a seamless expanse of white veined with subtle gray, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing Central Park like a living masterpiece. The art on the walls was quiet but significant, a pensive Rothko, a delicate Twombly, devoid of the gaudy, look-at-me decor Ethan favored. The warm wooden tones and subtle green plant accents created a cozy, inviting atmosphere, the soft natural daylight streaming through large windows enhancing the high-resolution cinematic quality in 4K resolution. And there, standing in a pool of afternoon sunlight, was Sophia, arranging a simple bouquet of white peonies in a crystal vase. Her casual cream blouse and tailored jeans accentuated her natural beauty, her dark brown hair falling in realistic strands that caught the warm light, her lifelike hazel eyes weary but unflinched. She didn't look surprised to see him, only tired, as if his presence was an unwelcome echo of a past she'd already buried. "Ethan, you shouldn't be here," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, placing a peony in the vase with deliberate care. "I needed to talk to you," he snarled, striding into the room, his tailored overcoat flapping with his agitation. "What is this, Sophia? What are you doing? The jet, the gala, this palace in the sky? You were my wife, a dreamer with sketches and no ambition. I found you. I made you." Sophia's calm was infuriating, a quiet strength that made Ethan's rage seem small and petulant. "You saw what you wanted to see," she said, her voice steady as she placed another peony in the vase. "You never looked closely enough to see the rest of me. You saw a reflection of your own ego and got angry when I didn't match the image you'd created." Ethan's face twisted, his sharp blue eyes blazing. "And him, this Alexander Hale, one of the richest men alive? You leave me and immediately find a billionaire? Was this your plan all along, playing the quiet artist while you waited for a bigger fish?" Sophia finally set down her shears and turned to face him fully, her hazel eyes blazing with a cold fire Ethan had never seen before, their lifelike reflections catching the warm light in a high-resolution, cinematic moment. "No, Ethan, that's your playbook, not mine," she said, her voice cutting like ice. "You're the one who measures a person's worth by their bank balance. I fell in love with a man who listens to me, who respects me, who sees me as an equal. His wealth is incidental. It's his character I love." Ethan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the serene penthouse. "Character? Men like that don't get to where they are by being nice guys. They're sharks, Sophia, just like me." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more chilling than a shout. "You're wrong. He's nothing like you." The depth of field blurred the panoramic view of Central Park, focusing on her steely resolve, the warm wooden furniture and green plant accents grounding the cozy, cinematic scene. Sophia walked to a sleek minimalist desk and picked up a slim leather-bound folder, its dark surface catching the soft daylight. "Alexander's people, as you'd call them, are very thorough," she said, her voice steady and clear. "When he fell in love with me, he became concerned about you, not as a rival, but as a threat. So they dug into our marriage, into our finances." She opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents that made Ethan's blood run cold. "Do you remember the Blackwood Fund, the private investment fund you started in our final year together? The one you told me was too complicated for me to understand." Ethan's throat tightened, his sharp blue eyes darting to the papers. "That's none of your business," he snapped, but his voice wavered. "It became my business when you forged my signature on the incorporation documents, making me a liable partner without my knowledge," Sophia said, her voice like ice. "It became my business when you used it as a shell to illegally hide marital assets during our divorce settlement. And it became my business, Ethan, when you used insider information from my mentor at the SEC, a man I trusted, to commit insider trading." She slid a single document across the polished desk, a copy of a wire transfer from the Blackwood Fund to an offshore account, dated 2 days before a major corporate acquisition was announced. Ethan had thought it buried under layers of corporate deceit, untouchable. "This is a copy," Sophia said, her hazel eyes unwavering. "The originals, along with a sworn affidavit from your former accountant, a man you fired without severance, who was more than happy to talk, are with the SEC. They're very interested in your complicated fund." Ethan stared at the paper, his world collapsing inward like a dying star. The bravado, the anger, the jealousy, it all drained away, replaced by a cold, sickening dread that settled in his bones. He'd been so focused on Sophia's new life, on the man she was with, that he'd never considered they might be looking back at him with a high-powered lens. He'd seen her as a ghost to be haunted, not a force to be reckoned with. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking, the sound pathetic even to his own ears. "Why are you doing this?" Sophia looked at him, not with hatred but with a profound, sad finality that was more devastating than any outburst. "You could have let me go, Ethan," she said. "You could have taken your petty victory at the auction, your new fiancé, your new life, and just walked away. But you couldn't. Your ego wouldn't allow it. You had to try to crush me one last time, to prove you were the winner. Well, congratulations. You've won. An SEC investigation, the end of your engagement, and the complete destruction of the reputation you worked so hard to build." She turned away, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park, her crimson gown from the gala replaced by the casual elegance of her blouse, yet her presence no less commanding. The depth of field blurred the penthouse's interior, focusing on her silhouette against the city's green expanse, the warm wooden tones and subtle green plants grounding the high-resolution cinematic moment in 4K clarity. "The doorman will show you out," she said, her voice final. "Goodbye, Ethan." He stood there for a long moment, a statue in the ruins of his own life, before turning and stumbling toward the elevator. The bronze walls closed around him, a fitting tomb for a defeated man who had finally understood the meaning of loss. He hadn't just lost his wife. He'd lost himself in the process. 6 months later, Sophia reclined on a plush lounger on the deck of Alexander's yacht, Serenitas, as it cut a graceful path through the turquoise waters off Capri. The name, Latin for serenity, was a perfect reflection of her new life, a state of calm undisturbed by the chaos of her past. The Mediterranean sun bathed her skin in warm, liquid gold, her dark brown hair falling in realistic strands that caught the soft natural daylight, her lifelike hazel eyes reflecting the sea's endless blue. She wore a simple linen dress, its cream fabric complementing the warm wooden deck and subtle green potted plants tucked into corners, creating a cozy, inviting atmosphere rendered in high-resolution, cinematic quality. The balanced lighting of cool and warm hues enhanced the serene, 4K, resolution scene, free of any artificial elements or distortions. The fallout from Ethan's confrontation had been swift and brutal, a public spectacle Sophia watched from a quiet distance. The SEC investigation into the Blackwood Fund became front-page news, with the Wall Street Journal running a damning series of articles that painted Ethan as a man consumed by greed and arrogance. His company, once a darling of the tech world, crumbled under the weight of legal scrutiny. Isabella, in a move of breathtaking self-preservation, fled the sinking ship, her publicist issuing a statement dripping with faux sincerity about irreconcilable differences in personal ethics. The statement went on to detail Isabella's newfound commitment to philanthropic causes, a transparent attempt to salvage her own reputation. The last Sophia heard, Isabella was photographed on the arm of a minor tech heir with a questionable fortune, trading one form of currency for another. Ethan, stripped of his company, his fiancée, and his reputation, was forced to sell his assets at fire sale prices to cover legal fees and fines. The Gulfstream jet, the Bentley, the Park Avenue apartment, all were liquidated, casualties of his hubris. He retreated from public life, a disgraced footnote in the annals of Manhattan society. Sophia felt no joy in his downfall, only a quiet, sad sense of inevitability. He'd built his life on a foundation of sand, and it had been washed away by a tide of his own making. Alexander emerged from the yacht's cabin, a tray in his hands bearing 2 glasses of chilled white wine and a plate of figs and cheese. He sat beside her, his presence a comforting warmth, his tailored linen shirt and kind brown eyes radiating quiet strength. The realistic strands of his dark hair, flecked with gray, caught the warm light, enhancing the cozy atmosphere. A message came through on the satellite comms, he said, handing her a glass, his voice a low rumble. From Edward Langley at the auction house. The Bauhaus sketches are back on the market. Ethan defaulted on his payment. Alexander's eyes twinkled with amusement. Langley wondered if you're still interested. He can secure them privately before they go to auction again. Sophia stared out at the endless blue horizon, the sea merging seamlessly with the sky. She thought of the sketches, of the desperate hunger she'd felt for them in the Vanderbilt Hall, seeing them as a lifeline to a world of substance she'd been denied. She thought of the sting of Ethan's cruelty, his deliberate bid to humiliate her. But as she sat there, the sun warming her skin, the yacht's gentle sway a lullaby of her new life, she realized that hunger was gone. "No," she said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "Tell him thank you, but I'm not interested." Her passion for those sketches had been a symptom of a deeper need, a need to connect with a life of meaning, a life starved during her marriage. Now, she was living that life every day. She and Alexander spent their evenings reading design journals, debating modernist principles, and planning the curriculum for a new literary and design foundation they'd endowed together. The sketches were a symbol of a craving that had been satisfied, not by objects, but by purpose. "I have a real thing now," she said, turning to him, her hazel eyes shining with clarity. She leaned over and kissed him, a slow, deep kiss filled with gratitude and a peace she'd once thought unattainable. Alexander smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached his eyes, and gestured to a small leather-bound book on the table beside them, an object she hadn't noticed before. "I have something for you," he said, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. Sophia picked up the book, its navy leather soft and worn, a small embossed H in the corner. She opened it, her breath catching. On the first page, in Alexander's elegant handwriting, were the words, "The collected thoughts of Alexander Hale, on meeting Sophia Reynolds and thereafter." Her fingers, trembling slightly, turned the pages. It was filled with observations about her, quotes from their conversations about art and design, half-formed sketches of her ideas, and heartfelt declarations of his growing love. One entry, dated a week after their first meeting, read, "Sophia sees art not as a trophy, but as a soul, a story to be lived." She is the rarest thing I've encountered. A woman entirely, authentically herself. It was more intimate, more precious than any collection of sketches could ever be. It was their history, their story, written not for the world but for her alone. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, blurring the ink on the page. But they were not the tears of sadness or humiliation she'd known so well in her past. They were tears of pure, cleansing joy, a release of the weight she'd carried for years. The ghost of her past was finally gone, the auction, the ring, the gala fading into another lifetime. She closed the book and held it to her chest, as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. And to her, it was. She looked out at the endless expanse of the sea, the horizon a vista of infinite possibility. She had her own story now, her own love, quiet and unshakable. This was her new beginning, more beautiful than anything she could have dared to imagine. In the end, this wasn't just a story of wealth versus wealth. Ethan Blackwood's empire, built on ego and illusion, crumbled to dust, while Sophia Reynolds' new life flourished, rooted in authenticity and purpose. Her ultimate victory wasn't the jet or the gala. It was rediscovering her own worth, not as a billionaire's partner, but as a woman who had always been enough. Alexander Hale wasn't her rescuer. He was the partner who saw her for who she was, proving that character and love triumph over arrogance and flash.